の金について女金税のその意味を語るもなどか哀れなり。昔この里にまなごの正直というの一人の息女あり。
Today, in a temple just outside Kyoto, there is a great bronze hanging bell, which is never rung. Legend has it that 500 years ago that bell was recast from a bell that had been destroyed by a demoness in the temple of Dojoji. Dojoji. So many things have been said and sung of a cursed bell, an angry demoness, a lover who either pursued his course of piousness or rejected someone whom he loved. So many big stories, but the story of Dojoji begins in a small house on the great pilgrim route between the northeast of Japan and the famous temples of the west. A little manor house where lived a young girl, a sweet, lively, vivacious young girl named Kiyohime. She lived there with her father, and because this house was a way station on the pilgrim route, regularly monks and priests would visit for a meal, a rest, a bed for the night. Kiyohime loved talking to everyone. Whenever a new priest or a monk would come, she'd go right up to them and ask them all the questions she could think of. What does that do? Maybe it was rosary beads. What does that do? Where are you going? We're going off to the west over the Hidaka River towards all of those famous temples. And they loved to answer her questions. She was quick and she was charming. Her father didn't mind. It wasn't quite appropriate that a daughter should be so chatty with strangers, especially not in medieval Japan. But what harm can it do, he thought? They're only monks, and she is just a young girl. Time went past, and that house filled and emptied of visitors every spring, particularly. And most of the visitors were monks and priests who were getting on in years, shall we say. But one spring, along with the usual visitors, came an enthusiastic young novice. His name was Anjin. Kiyohime's father saw this odd one out among the pack of visitors, this new, rather handsome, upstanding young boy, and he said, "Darling," to his daughter, "Darling, that, my dear, is what they call a catch. That is the kind of man who one day will make you a good husband." "What's a husband?" Kiyohime said. She was young. She didn't know what a husband was. Everybody else did. They got the joke. She didn't get the joke. And she forgot all about it for a long time. But time went past, and one spring she was outside the house and she looked up, and walking towards her was a young man with broad shoulders, his robes flowing out behind him, the green hills and trees behind him. And it was as if she saw Anjin for the first time. And he saw her. They exchanged all of the proper pleasantries over the welcome meal that night. But whenever they looked at each other and they caught each other's eye, they'd blush and look away. And one time when she was walking past him and her kimono sleeve accidentally brushed the corner of his robe, each of them felt a jolt in the heart that neither of them could explain to each other or to themselves. But the night passed, and Anshin went on his way over to the west, across the Hidaka River to the west. Time passed again, but the next time he came, Kiyohime was waiting for him. And as Anshin came towards her, they shared a look. Hello. They exchanged all of the right pleasantries over the welcome meal, as they had before. But when night fell, there was something began to bubble up in both of them, an electricity between both of them. And it was like there was no one else in the world. And they talked, and maybe her kimono sleeve brushed his robe again. And maybe it was in her head, but they spent half the night up talking about how husband was a word that meant something now, and they would, in the morning, they'd talk to her father, and they'd get married, and they'd live happily ever after. Kiyohime was so excited, she could hardly sleep. But she must have slept, because when she woke up, he was gone. She asked all around the house, where is he? Where is Anshin? Where has he gone? No one knew, except one servant who was keeping watch by the gate, as he always did. Oh, that boy who comes here every year, he was up half the night, praying with all his might, it looked like, and then, at the crack of dawn, he got up, and he went on his way, as he always does. Kiyohime was inconsolable. They were in love. They had plans. He couldn't have just left, could he? He must have been taken. Someone must have made him leave. Kiyohime was quick. She knew where everyone went when they went on from that house. She was 3 miles down the road that she knew that he had taken, before she even knew that she was following him.
다시 모空なる道とみかの女山伏を逃すまじと追っかくるさすがに思いも裏波に浮きつ沈み恋しと女の一年どこじゃとなって
whispered something to the boatman. Don't let her pass. The wind carried those words down to where Kiyohime stood, and they entered her ear like a slap in the head. And then they trickled down to her heart, which was already broken. And then they trickled down further to her soul, and when the last word dropped into the bottom of her soul, something cracked. Sadness and worry turned to anger. Rage surrounded her like a halo. She looked across that river and she saw him crossing, and something cracked, something. She dived into the water after Anchi. She surfaced, a woman's head, a woman's shoulders, a woman's arms. But when she dived back down against that current, what flicked up in the water was not a pair of woman's feet, but it was a forked tail with scales as sharp as knives spiraling up it. And those scales, like a tide, went up her legs, past knees, past thighs as she went through that river more and more sinuously. More and more, the tide rose round her waist, round her breasts, round her shoulders, until they got to her head. And then, as she dived in again, her arms fused together, and her crying face detached itself from her neck and travelled down her arms until it was right at the end. And the last thing her human eyes saw, Kiyohime's human eyes, was her love, Anshin, getting out of the boat, running up the hill towards Dojoji Temple.
日高川をやすやすと泳ぎ渡り、この寺の他に忍ばん影もなし。降りたる鐘を怪しみて、竜頭を加え七まとい、まといまといて胸の日に鐘は湯となり、山伏はついにうせにけり、その時の終身残って証言をなすこそ恐ろしけれ。
The being that slithered out of the Hidaka River bore no resemblance to the woman who had dived in. That being, that serpent demoness, slithered up the riverbank, her knife-sharp scales cutting the ground and the heat of her rage burning it as she went. She got to the gates of Dojoji Temple, and as she passed, the two monks guarding the gate burst into flames. But she didn't stop. She couldn't see him, but she could smell him. She could smell him. He was under that bell that had been lowered, especially to hide someone who was trying to get away. She slithered up and into the inner precincts of the temple until she reached the bell. She heard a whimper from inside, and the woman inside that demon recognized the whimper. But soon the tide of demoness got over her, and she circled herself, snaking round the bell. And she began to spin, and the heat of her rage turned her skin red hot, her scales red hot, the bell red hot. She could hear no screams. She could hear nothing except the chiming, the beating of her heart inside that rage-filled snake. And the bell went from red hot to white hot. It was only when the bell began to collapse down into itself that she realized what she had done. When the monks in the temple came out of hiding sometime later. When they came out of hiding sometime later and looked under that misshapen mess of bronze that was the bell, they found nothing. No bones, no ashes, no trace of Angie. But there was a young boy who saw something out of the corner of his eye at the outer edges of the temple precincts. Two snakes, one seeming to lead another by an invisible leash, out of the temple, down the bank, and into the Hidaka River, away from Dojoji.
花の他には松ばかり花の他には松ばかり触れ染めて鐘や響くらん
As many of you know, the burning of a devout inside a bell is far from the end of that story. We'll be back in a little bit to tell you the next episode. Thank you for listening, and have a cool drink. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming back, even though we all almost melted, not just because of the heat from the bell, but because of the heat from outside. The next part happens at Dojoji Temple on a glorious, glorious spring morning. It was a day of festivities, a day of new things. A new bell had finally been hung in the belfry of Dojoji Temple. No one quite remembered why or how the first bell was destroyed, or why it took so long for that mass of scrap metal that was lying around in the temple to be recast, but today was the day. The bell would be raised and it would be rung and it would be blessed in a special ceremony. The abbot of the temple allowed the public in for this ceremony. Well, half the public. No women were to be allowed in the precincts of the temple during the ceremony. Why? I don't know. Nobody knew. None of the monks knew, but the abbot had said so, and the abbot's word was law, so no one asked. A monk and a servant were sent down to the temple gates to make sure that the right people were let in, the men, and the right people were kept out, the women. Fair, not fair, but throughout the morning people arrived, and the monk and the servant did well. They let in the right people and kept out the wrong people. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, and the monk was about to scurry off to the precincts of the temple to his other duties, the servant saw something in the distance coming up the Hidaka riverbank. It was a court dancer? She came closer. It wasn't just any court dancer, it was a shirabyoshi in full men's court costume. The best and the most expensive kind of court dancer was coming straight towards them. And as she came closer, and the plum blossoms fell around her as if she was an enchanted princess from a bygone age. The servant was transfixed. The monk less so. When that woman arrived in front of them, the monk said, "What are you doing here?" The woman looked at him. He didn't know who she was. Good. She didn't say who she was, she just bowed and said, "I have come to give a dance for the blessing of the bell in this place today, free of charge." "Sorry, no women allowed," said the monk. The servant, "What? One of the best and most expensive court dancers in the country comes to our door and you won't let her in just because she's a woman? Come on!" "No," said the monk. "But no," said the monk, and scurried off on to his duties, leaving the servant and the court dancer alone at the temple gates. The court dancer smiled at the servant. When the servant and the court dancer arrived in the inner precincts of the temple, the ceremony was almost over. The abbot had blessed the bell in a public ceremony and was now inside in the meditation hall in silent prayer, which was the final blessing of the bell. All of the monks and all of the guests were gathered round the podium of the belfry. The servant led that strange woman, that court dancer, up onto the stage. She surveyed all the men around her. The sun was low in the late afternoon, and a hush descended over the guests and the monks present. The dancer bowed and began to dance. Her arms and legs moving in the most divine synchronicity. Her arms and her legs moved so gracefully that little by little, as the minutes passed, every guest and every monk fell into kind of a trance. But she carried on dancing, her arms and her legs making the most impossible shapes and wondrous pictures in everyone's minds. The sun went down and still she danced, and one by one, every guest fell into an enchanted sleep. The sun had set by then and twilight had fallen, but the dancer kept on dancing, but now she danced in a different way. She turned her body towards the bell, and she began to dance to it, looking so hard at it. It was as if she was looking straight into the bronze and into the heart of the bell. And she began to process around the bell. Slowly at first, staring at the bell every so often. And then faster, sometimes putting her hand out and touching the bell as if it was a lost lover of hers. Faster she went around the bell, and the night deepened, and the moon started to shine off what looked much less now like robes and skin, but metallic triangular scales. And still she continued to dance long into the night, everybody asleep. Faster and faster and faster and faster. Around and around and around and around that bell, until she was almost one with it. And when she could go no faster, she jumped up into the bell, and as she jumped, the bell fell straight down with a crash to the ground. Huh? Everyone who was there woke up at the sound, and their minds were addled. They could hardly remember that they'd seen a dance or a... But something had happened and the bell had fallen down. The abbot came running out, and when he saw the bell, he knew exactly what had happened. One of you let a woman into this place. Do you know why? I told you, no woman should be allowed in this place. No one did. He hadn't told them. So he told them. He told them of a ruined bell, a murder, a wronged young lady, rage, the river, the chase. And as he told them, they began to understand. The abbot said, her spirit is still here with us. The ceremony to inaugurate the new bell would have released her soul and the soul of the man that she murdered. Now, my brothers, we must make amends. We must pull up this bell, and we must pray with all of our might. All the inhabitants of the temple took hold of the bell rope and started to pull. And as they pulled, they started to pray. difficult to raise. But soon the prayers crowded round that bell and it started to hum. And then it rose slowly off the ground and something emerged from underneath. The thing that emerged from underneath that bell bore no resemblance to the court dancer who had danced so elegantly and so hypnotizingly before. Gnarled hands saw first, nails long and broken, scales sharp enough to stab a man and kill him in one blow. And then, as the bell rose higher, a hunched back, and as it rose higher, a chin and a mouth pulled back into a rictus of agony and rage. Eyes that had seen more than any person or any being should ever see, and horns sticking straight out of the front like a wild boar's ready to gore anyone who came near. And that demoness, that spirit of that person who once was so demon that she'd forgotten almost she was ever anything else, went for those monks. But the monks prayed to the north, they prayed to the south, they prayed to the east, the west and the centre, and they pushed back. And that demoness withdrew, but then she came at them again, horns down. And the monks prayed again, north, south, east, west, centre, and pushed her back. And this time, that spirit, that demoness, that face tortured, rose up, and she started to spin around until she was almost invisible. She spun around like a spinning top, and then she was gone. As if she had never been there at all. The monks patted each other on the back and congratulated each other. They had completed an exorcism. Yes, they were the best monks that Dojo had ever seen. They were going to have another party now. They had beaten the evil spirit. But I hate to tell you this, the next time the bell was tolled, something bad happened. And each and every time it was tolled after that until it was buried deep in the mountains, something bad happened. And every time something bad happened, if someone was at the outer edge of the temple precincts, they saw a pair of snakes with pointed scales, one leading the other by an invisible leash, out of the temple, down the Hidaka riverbank, away from Dojoji, and on somewhere else. In the temple just outside Kyoto today, there is a great bronze bell that hasn't been rung in over 500 years.
「この鐘について女禁制のその意味を語るもなどか哀れなり」
That's probably not the end either. But it's the end of tonight. Thank you so much. here before we all get kicked out here. So you should probably get it sooner rather than later. If yeah, if you want to cool down a bit, boiling.